everybody.
Hi there, I'm Larry.
I'm Emily.
And this is Planted in God. I just want to say, nice shirt.
Yeah, I know, right?
Second time this week we've matched.
I know, that's scary.
What is going on?
I don't know.
Too much time together. That's what. Way too much time together. So, what are we doing?
So today we are doing John chapter 5.
John chapter 5.
Yeah, this will button up the week, and then you guys will have the weekend to recap, and then we will start again on Monday with John chapter 6.
Brilliant. So, without further ado, let's get into our thoughts after we've read John chapter 5.
So at the start, we see we're back at another feast again.
We are. This is not the Passover. We've already seen
just
that.
saw it,
we
right.
just saw it. This would be another feast that would require traveling to Jerusalem. So either the Feast of Weeks or the Feast of Tabernacles. We're not really sure which one, but it's one of them.
And so they pass this sheep gate. There's a pool at the sheep gate, which is called Bethesda. Bethesda. That's. I'm being.
Bethzata.
Okay, that's not what mine says.
Mine's. Which version are you reading?
New King James.
And I'm reading the NET.
Okay, well, Bethsaida.
Yeah.
Something of the sort.
Something like that.
So what's interesting about this pool is that there is an angel that comes down and ruffles the water.
So I want to stop you there, because a lot of people, depending on the version of Bible you're reading, you're either going to have verse 4 or you're not going to have verse 4, and it's going to be a footnote. So you're reading New King James. So the New King James uses a different... King James and New King James use a different codex. That is like a set of Old Testament, like the actual scriptures that they found, right? So in the newer translations, the newer manuscripts don't have verse 4 in them.
That's different.
It's different, but it's not an error. That's the thing. It's not an error, and this is what I really want to get at and hone into, is that this is not an error. It's not something wrong with your translation. It's not that King James is like the one and only because it has all the Bible verses. It's not. What they found in finding there, so there are like thousands of copies of the New Testament in the original language. Like the New Testament there is more root text documents than there are for Homer's Iliad or, the works of any of the great philosophers whose names I can't think right now. But there's more text supporting the Bible than there is any other historical writer. And so what has happened is that a lot of translators think that verse 4 could have been added to give more context as to why this pool was so important. Because what you see when you read through this, the verse 4 will talk about this angel that stirs up, right? That's the legend. An angel will come and stir up the pool. And the first person that gets in is the one that is healed.
Well, there's obviously some truth to that, because otherwise why would everybody be sitting there either?
Right, but that's the legend, and verse 4 is more like this is context to the legend, and that's why some Bibles contain it, some Bibles put it as a footnote, right? Other translations say this. So it's not that verse 4 is missing, it's more of like a contextual note.
Because in verse 7, where it says, the sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up.
Right, but he doesn't mention the angel stirring.
No.
So that's why it's like, okay, that's not it's having that verse there or taking it away doesn't change the passage.
No, and it doesn't change the miraculous aspect of the water being able to heal people, I don't think either. Because clearly they were being healed. Otherwise, why would they all be sitting there?
So I want you to know, as you're reading, if your version of the Bible doesn't have a verse 4 and it skips over that, it's not a problem. That's the thing. It's not a problem. Verse 4 is more like a contextual, this is why this pool is so important, or why these people are gathering around this pool, because legend has it, an angel stirs it up. Sorry, I think I messed your thought up, but I wanted to get that out there because a lot of people you'll have like a King James only camp who like will use stuff like this to go, oh, your ESVs and NEVs, don't use them. They're missing Bible verses. That's not the case. It's just context.
And in fact, I think it's okay to look at all different translations
Right.
and compare and contrast.
Exactly.
So, no, you didn't really mess up my thought. I basically was just saying, like, this is a miraculous thing here that this pool of water does.
Right.
Right? Whether it is from an angel or not.
Yeah.
God is allowing some kind
Something to
of,
happen.
right.
Yeah.
Whether or not where it comes from, we don't know. But the fact of the matter is that these people would get in before him and he would not get a chance to go,
Right. He doesn't have anyone to pick him up. So Jesus just says, pick up your mat and walk.
Well, I find it interesting that Jesus says, do you want to be made well?
Yeah.
Jesus is saying, like, do you want it? Well, he's sitting at the pool.
Well, he's asking for him to have faith first.
Well, obviously.
But not faith in this pool.
But right.
Right.
I find it interesting that he's asking him and the guy's like, he clearly knows he does. And
Right.
so instead of the man saying yes, he says, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water stirred, but while I'm coming, another steps down before me. So he's
Right.
explaining, like,
The physical aspect of it.
right, he's not saying, yes, I want it. Right, Jesus knows he wants it.
Right.
That's why he's sitting there. But he's saying, this is why I can't have it.
Right.
Right?
He's giving all these physical excuses as to why he can't have it, but Jesus is like, no, it's not about that.
Well, also, too, he's got some hope because he
Right.
is there.
Right.
And so there is some hope, like maybe if nobody else is by the water
Yeah.
when I'm there, And what Jesus is saying is, you don't need that,
Right.
Well,
No, he needs to change where his faith goes.
and he didn't even know it was Jesus at this point, I don't think.
No, he didn't.
Because later we find that, when the Pharisees are talking to him, he's like, I don't know who did that.
Yeah. Yeah, because so Jesus tells the man to pick up your mat. He does so, and he starts walking. The leaders see him, and they become angry,
Yeah.
right? And what's interesting is that they're angry at the fact that he's carrying his mat, not rejoicing over the fact that this man who was lame is now walking.
I was thinking that too. I'm like, so you can definitely see the difference between Jesus and the leaders, the
Yeah.
religious leaders, because Jesus cared about the well-being of this man.
Yeah.
He loved this man, or loved, whatever, you know what I mean.
Right.
And the religious leaders,
Cared about the law.
all they care about is the law, right?
And what's interesting though is that they say it is the Sabbath, you are not permitted to carry your mat. That's not in the Old Testament.
Right.
That is in the Mishnah.
It's one of their
That is
extra laws.
Extra laws.
I
from the
noted that,
oral.
too.
Yeah. The law though that they built that off of is based off of Jeremiah 17 verses 21 through 22, which teaches that one should not carry a load or bear a burden on the Sabbath. However, the context of Jeremiah is talking about doing something burdensome to make a profit,
Yeah.
i.e. work, right? Like I go
Work
to my
for
job,
a
work
wage.
for a wage. Not just generally carrying your mat through the city.
Yeah. Yeah, I noted all those things too.
Yeah,
Their love for people is not there.
right. It's not. And so then Jesus finds the man again. He talks to him, and then the man goes, oh, it was Jesus. And then goes and tells the
Yeah, which I don't
Jewish
get
leaders.
that. Why would he go back? I mean, unless he is,
Well, the
there's an
Jewish-
authority, right? They have an aspect of authority, the leaders do.
They do, and they're not like, yes, they might have been angry at the guy, but they're not like trying to condemn the guy who was healed. They want to condemn the healer, right? So they might be like, they're trying to play both sides of the coin here to get information.
Right, I could see that.
Yeah. So Jesus is identified as the healer, and then the Pharisees turn their attention to him and start to persecute Jesus for healing on the Sabbath.
Right. The man himself actually doesn't get in trouble.
No,
for
he doesn't.
carrying
He walks
his
away and we
bed.
never hear about him again.
Right. What I do think is interesting, so kind of to backtrack just a teensy bit, when Jesus does find him, he tells him, he says, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." Right? So the first thing I notice is that he doesn't actually praise and worship him. And there's a lot of other stories within the Gospels that talk about, like, when he heals them, they praise and worship him in that moment. And I don't see any of that here. He just picks up his bed and walks instead of, like, dancing down the street. Like, and the second thing that I thought was really interesting is that when Jesus found him again, he reminds him that he was made well, and he tells him to sin no more. Which brings me back, and it makes me wonder what caused this infirmity, right? Was it a sin that he could have committed?
That's possible.
And then that brought me back to John 8:11, which is about the woman that was caught in adultery.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus says, neither do I condemn you, go and sin no more. And then, so she was caught in a sinful act. Right. And so not that he was caught in a sinful act, but maybe there was some kind of sin that could have caused his infirmity.
Right.
Which I thought was really an interesting take on it. Not that that's obviously truth, because it's a little bit of speculation there. Yeah. But I'll own up to my speculation. So.
There you go.
But that he also says, lest a worse thing had come upon you. So saying, sin no more, because if you do, something else could happen that's worse than what previously happened. So I think that God or Jesus is giving this man a simple warning, to just go and sin no more. You don't want anything else bad to happen.
Right.
Which, that's a good warning for us too.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not perfect, so we
obviously
will sin.
Everybody sins, but I think in this case, Jesus is talking about like intentional sin,
right?
Or habitual sin.
Habitual, intentional.
Something that like you're doing and you're doing it,
right?
Which obviously we're trying not to sin,
right?
But in our lives we will, and we do.
So then the attention turns from this man to Jesus. Mm-hmm. And now Jesus has to deal with these religious leaders who are persecuting him. And Jesus' first response, my Father is working until now, and I too am working. Right? So Jesus, in that statement, he's talking about how the Father has been working on the Sabbath since the beginning of creation. Essentially, what he's saying is that, God finished creation in 6 days, rested on the seventh, but then his rest was effectively disrupted, or God's ability to rest was disrupted by sin entering the world. When Adam sinned, God is now working daily to restore mankind to him. So that's why the Father is working, and he now works ceaselessly to bring mankind back to himself. And so therefore, Jesus is working on the Sabbath because his Father works on the Sabbath.
I mean, I find that to be comforting to know that the Lord is constantly working, right? Because that shows his care.
It does. But in all of this, Jesus is trying to claim, or he is claiming, that he is equal with God. Right? He is claiming equality with God at this point in time. And that's why the Jewish leaders seek to kill him all the more. And as we see moving through the rest of Jesus' discourse, he is going to defend his equality with God.
Yeah, and honestly, this is the biggest issue with the religious leaders, is that he makes himself equal with God and he broke the Sabbath.
Right.
Like, those were the two...
There are two discrepancies. Mm-hmm. But both of those...
But he really didn't break the Sabbath. Let's be real here.
No, he didn't.
In their minds, he broke the Sabbath.
Right.
And in their minds, he made himself equal to God. But in reality, is that he did not break the Sabbath, and he is equal with God.
Right. He is Lord of the Sabbath. And in all honesty, God never intended the Sabbath to be a hardship on mankind. and the way the religious leaders were handling the Sabbath is it had become a hardship, right? You can't do anything. You wake up, you stay in bed, or you sit on the couch. You can't, like, it is burdensome.
Well, and is that really truly rest either?
No, it's
You know
not.
what I mean? Like, when we look at rest, it doesn't mean, like, do nothing.
Right.
I mean, that is the case in some things, but not, I don't think spiritual rest is like that.
No, it's not.
There's a big difference.
So one thing I found was interesting as I was reading and studying this, and I found this note from J. Sidlow Baxter in his book Explore the Book. He points out that Jesus makes 7 claims of equality with God in this section. So in verse 19, he claims to be equal in working with God. In verse 20, equal in knowing, like his knowledge level is equal with God. In verses 21 and 28 through 29, equal in resurrecting. So God has resurrection power. The Son has resurrection power. In verses 22 and 27, equal in judging. Right? The Lord has effectively given judgment to the Son and the Son's ability to judge. Equal in honor in verse 23, equal in regenerating in verses 24 and 25, and then equal in self-existence in verse 26, thereby showing that Jesus was with God at the beginning. The Trinity was there in perfect unity. This all just really highlights the fact that Jesus is equal with the Father. And that is like a big no-no from the Jewish mindset, but he backs it up with his actions, with his words, with the fact that the scriptures have spoken of him. And that's where we get into the next section of the witnesses for the Messiah.
I think what's really amazing too here is that we see the authority, right? Jesus accepts and acknowledges that the authority comes from God the Father,
right,
too. You can see that throughout this part of Scripture.
Yeah.
So, and then, sorry, we go into the witnesses.
Yeah, so we have all of the equality with God, and now we're getting into the witnesses of who Jesus is, the fact that he is God in the flesh, and there are 4 witnesses that speak to that. You've got John the Baptist, his miracles, the scriptures, and Moses, all witnesses to who Jesus is. Now, one thing I thought was interesting and kind of funny, Jesus says this in verse 30, he says, I can do nothing of my own initiative. I wanted to explain that a little bit because he's not saying that he doesn't have the power to do anything, but rather he is so closely united with the Father that he doesn't have a will of his own. Right? Everything that Jesus does is the Father's will. That's how closely united he is with it.
Well, I think that, again, goes back to the authority as
Right.
well, right? He's acknowledging that God the Father has the authority. But it kind of reminds me of, like, the desires of our heart.
Right.
And what are the desires of our heart? And when that aligns with Christ, our desires become Christ's desires.
Yeah, they do.
And that's a picture of this.
Yep,
You know?
wholeheartedly. Any
Yeah,
thoughts from you? I've been talking a lot here.
I mean, I basically noted the same things, right? He's talking in this section or whatever. He is talking to the religious leaders,
Yep.
right? Which I find it heartwarming that God cares so much that he's like, I understand you guys have hard hearts, and I'm just going to do what I can to lay it all out there, you know? So knowing whether or not they believe, because I would imagine that some of them probably did come to the knowledge that Jesus Christ is the Son of God.
Probably did.
I think so too.
Yeah.
But I think it's comforting to know that even with hard hearts, that God still, makes a way. He puts that out there, and he's like, I'm not just, these words are important.
Yep.
They're not, whether or not they believe or not, right? They're important. They're important to the religious leaders. They're important to unbelievers. They're important to believers for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
For salvation, for learning purposes, for being a witness.
Yep.
I liked that.
It's really
Yeah. So that's all I got.
cool.
You?
Well, that's it.
All right. So that wraps up the first week.
Congratulations, you've made it this far. 1 week in, several to go.
Yes.
So we'll catch you on Monday for John chapter 6. And have a good weekend.
All right. See ya.
Bye.